Good morning, and it's almost the end of term and the long summer holiday. So we're following on today. I'm just going to turn around because there's better lights. I'm going to follow on today with classification, and what we got hopefully from the first lesson is the work of Linnaeus. So what you need to ensure you have recorded is his name was Carl Linnaeus. He came up with the idea of classification, giving us a common language across the world and throughout science. And obviously he had limitations. So he managed to classify over 7,000 species of animal and plant, 7,000 plant, 3,000 animals, and he came up with this thing. And in his day, based upon what they'd seen, they divided things into two kingdoms, plants and animals. Now, obviously, in the last 300 years since he did his work, we've got loads more evidence and we've got loads better equipment. So things have changed and developed, but we still stick with this order: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. We still name everything like Homo sapiens for us, or if you remember from last lesson, Ursus arctos for the polar bear. But we have more modern, put these on for a second. In terms of keywords here, we have more modern methods now of seeing. So what Linnaeus could do was look at things and look at their features, whereas now we have a lot better ways of looking at this. So for example, I'm just going to put the highlighter on for a second. This first word, homologous. Homo means same, and these are homologous structures. What that means is we have the same bones in our legs as a dog. So where we have a radius and ulna in our arm here, where we have all these digits and bones, exactly the same bones exist in the leg of a dog and the same bones in the hand. So there's the structures there in the bones would suggest that us and dogs have quite a lot in common in terms of our skeletons. So those are homologous structures between us and dogs and lions and other mammals. We have those. The second one here, embryos. Embryology is the study of embryos. Embryo development from an early stage, when the cells first are fertilized and then grow into an embryo, there can be a lot of similarities, and we'll come on to that in a minute. Molecules in biochemistry and chemistry, if the molecules making up the creatures are similar, we now have the technology to look at the molecules. We can look at the sequence of DNA and how many genes are similar. So what we now know from this is, instead of, well, in Linnaeus's day, Linnaeus would have had Homo sapiens and chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas and gibbons all together as the great apes. So we were in the same sort of family together. However, by looking at the DNA here, what we can now say is that we know we are much closer with a chimpanzee than we are with a gorilla or an orangutan. So our closest evolutionary ancestor, the ones that we're most similar to and we have most the same genes as, is a chimpanzee. And then here, dichotomous is a dichotomous key is a way of dividing up animals, and we'll come on to that in a minute. And a cladogram is a way of showing how related animals are to each other, evolutionary. So us and chimpanzees would be quite similar together in a cladogram. So those could be added to your glossary now or during this lesson at some point. Right, this is an example of homologous structures. So what we have here, I'll just go back to it a minute, is look at the green bones. They are the same in a human, a cheetah, a whale and a bat. So here are 4 different mammals, and these are the bones in the forelimbs. So if you look at it, those idea of fingers, here in the bat, they've got much smaller, thinner, and then really long, thin, what we would call fingers, phalanges. Here they have these really long, thin ones holding up and supporting the wing. And obviously you can see that the fact that they're much thinner, lighter bones because a bat flies. Whereas here, look at the fingers holding the flukes, the flippers of a whale. Massive, great big structures. Those fingers as wide as the bones in our arms. Much smaller bones here, comparatively. Obviously they are bigger because a whale is bigger, but comparatively with the other bones in the phalanges. And look at the similarities here between us and cheetah. So homologous features, they are the same features, the same bones in these related animals, and that's because we're all mammals. So that's helped us in a way to know exactly how close things are. Second bit, the embryology. This is obviously the very earliest stage when the eggs are fertilized up here, and then this is after a couple of weeks. If you look across here, that one and us are very similar. However, that is the embryo that will grow into a chicken, and this is the embryo that will grow into a person. Again, very similar to the embryo that will grow into a pig. So that would suggest that these animals have evolutionarily been very closely related to each other. You've got a fish here on the end, so your mammals, your birds, your reptiles here with the example of the tortoise and the fish, that puts them all close together, and those are all vertebrates. So we talked about some of the main divisions within the animal kingdom. All of these animals have backbones. All of these animals start by developing a cord. I'll just change pens for a second. They all start by developing a cord, a backbone, a spine, and at this stage in the embryo development they all have a tail, although we lose ours as we develop. Yes, you did once have a tail. The cladogram idea would show here, so for example, these animals here, the wolf has hair, it's a mammal. The turtle and the wolf are closer together because of the way their eggs are inside the fluid. And then a cladogram shows how well related. So a wolf and a turtle have a lot more in common in the terms of their features than a wolf and a lamprey, a primitive type of fish. Both of them have a vertebral column, both of them have a spine, but there's significant differences between them. So the cladogram helps us to organise animals so that you can see how similar they are to each other based upon the features. The next bit of evidence is the molecules, the DNA and the RNA. So when we look at the genes of ourselves, as I've said before about 3 minutes ago, in the DNA we have lots and lots of similarities with a chimpanzee, much more so than with an oak tree. An oak tree has some of the same genes as us, but nowhere near what a chimpanzee would have. We have more in common with a chimpanzee in terms of our DNA than we do an orangutan. However, we have more in common with an orangutan than with a cat or a dog, because we're further away from those evolutionary. And we're coming on to evolution in the next couple of lessons. So, a dichotomous key is one of the simple ways of organising and helping to classify animals. Some of these can be quite complicated, but for example, it just asks 2 questions. So when you find an animal, you can ask yourself one question. Does it have a backbone or does it not have a backbone, a vertebrae? If it has a backbone, you'd go down one sort of decision making. It's got a backbone, therefore it is a vertebrate. It doesn't have a backbone, it's an invertebrate. Does it have hair? I'll go down mammals. It doesn't have hair, it's not a mammal. And so on. Simple examples of those. These ones here. Does it have feathers? Yes. That means it goes down this line here. So I'll go off this way. Does it have, can it swim? Yes, then it was a duck. No, it was a hen. Does it have feathers? No. You go down this way. So this is a simple key designed that you could easily identify the difference between a duck, a hen, a lizard and a snake. 2 reptiles and 2 birds. So does it have feathers? Yes, it's a bird. No, it's not a bird. Does it have legs as the lizard, if you're trying to tell the difference? Second example, dichotomous key, if you're trying to tell these animals apart, same sort of idea. Does it have tentacles present? If it does, you go to 2, or does it not have tentacles, you go to 3. So the similar sort of idea to identify different animals. So what you hopefully will have recorded so far, some of the modern techniques. So if you need to, go back to the slide about homologous structures and give some examples of those. Then the slide about embryology, give some examples of that, for the similarities, maybe a couple of drawings there. Then about the DNA, and those are the 3 more modern bits, the biochemistry ones, those are the 3 more modern bits of evidence that we now have that Linnaeus didn't have. Once you've done these questions, okay, just going to flick through this quickly. Now Linnaeus had originally classified all the living organisms into animals and plants. He had fungi in with plants, and he didn't know about the existence of prokaryotes or protists because they didn't have the technology to see these microscopic creatures. So then over time it developed from 2 kingdoms. So instead of just animals and plants, so here we go, animals and plants, it then developed into fungi, prokaryotes and protists. Since then, however, it's now developed into 6 kingdoms. And then the prokaryotes were found to be very, very different. The whole chemistry of them was different. So the difference between an archaea type of bacteria, which was how they were named, they're now not even classified as bacteria, an archaea and a normal bacteria is the same as the difference between us and a bacteria. So one last scientist mentioned, and his name was Carl Voss. So I've gone on about Linnaeus a lot. Linnaeus came up with modern classification. Linnaeus said, here's how you organise things, and then you've got your kingdoms, phylums, class, order, family, genus, species. However, there is now one tweak to it. You need to go back to that original list of how we organise, the one that you should have written a mnemonic for, and at the very top we need to add in a new one because of the work of Carl Voss looking at biochemistry and the actual chemicals creatures are made of. In this sort of early 1980s, so fairly recently, it says here, and others in the 70s, but it's more in the 80s they introduced it. There's now 3 domains. So domains come above kingdoms. So Carl Voss and some others, looking at the biochemistry, came up with this idea of 3 domains, and domains goes above kingdom. So in terms of that, here are the 3 domains they proposed. There are eukaryotes, and Linnaeus's time, he'd had everything in plants and animals. And then when we went to different kingdoms, we had bacteria as a kingdom, etc. But these are the animals with a nucleus. That's what they have inside their cells. Archaea and bacteria do not have a nucleus. However, archaea and bacteria are very, very different in how they're made up and how their cell membranes are made, showing that it's a long, long time ago, all the way back here through time, just very early on when life first appeared on the planet, that's when bacteria and archaea could be separated from each other. So we are a kingdom in the domain eukaryotes. There are other kingdoms in the domain archaea, and there are other kingdoms in the domain bacteria. So domain is now the top level of organisation. Now, in terms of what you should be recording, so we have a scientist called Carl Voss. You get his name and spelling off the previous slide by just flicking back. You've got the idea that there's 3 domains now, and that's based upon molecules and their structure. And what they've now shown, because of this more evidence over time, is the organisation of kingdoms. There's a higher level above that called domains. So write down the names of the 3 domains. That sounds funny, writing the names of the domains, but anyway. So you've written down bacteria, archaea and eukaryotes. any kingdom or any organisms, so all of these ones here, that pen's, how can my pen be running out if it's on a computer? All of these different kingdoms and groups of animals, phylums of animals, all have a nucleus. All of these ones over here are the true bacteria. They don't have a nucleus. They have RNA, usually rather than DNA. But these ones in the middle that are in red, the archaea, are as different from bacteria as they are from us. So there are 3 domains of living organisms on the planet. Animals and plants are much, animals and plants, we are much more similar together. So you have a lot more in common with a bush than you do with a bacteria. We are much more closely related. We have much more common features with them in our cells, such as having a nucleus. Right. Flick back, make sure you've got the key words, make sure you've answered those questions as best you can. Send your work in to your teacher, and thank you.